The trailer for Malignant looked like it would be a freaky and creepy time with James Wan crafting a new horror for us. It's both in theaters and on HBO Max right now, so are you watching? A woman is paralyzed by shocking visions of grisly murders, and her torment worsens as she discovers that these waking dreams are terrifying realities. So I went most of this movie trying to figure out if the schlocky cheesiness that permeates a lot of this was intentional or if it was just some misstep for the movie. The opening sequence is right out of some kooky slasher film where the characters overact and then react in ridiculous ways. I think some of the cheesiness is on purpose. It's not to the degree to be outright laughable, but there is a quality to this entire story that could feel a bit lame if it weren't on purpose. We have Madison, a woman who experiences some trauma and then begins to see some pretty shocking scenes of horror. She later finds out that the events she sees in her mind have actually happened, and then the mystery begins of how and then why she's experiencing these visions. So from a horror aspect, this is pretty grisly. There's a good amount of violent gore that's displayed, and a lot of the time the camera just doesn't shy away from showing it right to us. Annabelle Wallis stars in the lead role, and she plays Madison as a good, unreliable narrator. She is shocked and horrified at what she sees, but then it also feels so real for her that she's all out of sorts. There's some cool cinematography that's used in the movie. There's one particular scene where we follow Madison through her house, but we're watching it from the top down as she goes from room to room with some urgency. I thought it was a unique way to follow the character, and I really liked that shot choice. There are other times where the environments are used well to create some ominous atmospheres. The film takes place in Seattle, and they use the old underground city for a portion, and I thought it was a great looking set piece that creates both visual interest and then potential dangers for the characters that move through it. The film also likes to use light and shadow to create mystery and suspense. Now at the beginning of the film, I thought it was used well, but as the story went along, I think it became less effective. There are other times where the film quality looks more like it was shot for a made-for-TV movie rather than something for the large screen, but it also fits a bit with that whole schlockiness that I mentioned. It's an aesthetic choice, and it's fairly consistent throughout the production. Now I know I keep mentioning the cheesiness that's present in this, and it's pretty apparent in several situations. Whether it's character interactions and dialogue or its sequences and setups, there is a level of ridiculousness that exists, and I think depending on how it affects you is going to make or break this film for you. I do believe that a lot of this story too is predictable, and while there are some moments of misdirection and doubt that are introduced, I think the majority is pretty obvious. I'm not sure that this lack of mystery is enough to ruin the film, because when we get to the payoff, it's crazy and wild. I mean, there is an insane action sequence that is bloody and frenetic. Now, it does look more like a video game sequence than anything cinematic when we get to that point, so it could really break you out of the moment simply because of that visual aesthetic. But from an action standpoint, it's a lot of fun, if not outrageous at times. There was even a few moments where I laughed out loud because what was happening on screen was just so ludicrous. And I wanted to be able to say ludicrous in this review. And I'm saying that as a positive. I mean, it was violent, frenzied, and ultimately fun. There's a characteristic to the main antagonist, and it was oddly intriguing to watch. I mean, I do applaud the creativity of the movements for that character. And I don't think the concept, though, for that antagonist is very original, even though the way that it's executed on screen does feel a little bit different. And now, really, that sounds like a contradiction, right? But it's not meant to be. I'm being vague because to go really into great detail is going to spoil it all. Let's just say that we've seen similar characters before in movies, but the way this one was approached did have some originality. There's also an element to the character that I didn't feel was totally explained. Environments are affected by the character's presence, which I thought was a good effect. They use it to clue us in that something diabolical might be occurring soon. But I'm not sure how the environmental manipulation actually happened and then why it was able to be affected by the character. But it's also easy to overlook that story omission. The movie is an hour and 51 minutes, and there wasn't much downtime that felt like it was dragging. When there were quieter moments, the story was pursuing the mystery angle, which worked for what it was because I was looking for some explanation to certain specifics, even though I had already figured out the main story. Now, there is plot protection for some characters and some very evident story conveniences that are built in, which then help to keep the narrative moving forward. And depending on how much you're liking the film or not when these occur is probably going to determine the level at which they bother you. I had kind of resigned myself to the cheesiness, so when there were those conveniences that were introduced, I just kind of went with it. Now, the story has a clear resolution, but the way this is crafted, I do wonder if there is any franchise potential. And I'd be fine if this was just a one and done, but I'd also be curious to see how James Wan would use this story to build out a new horror universe. So overall, this is a decent thriller that delivers on the blood and the gore. There's a good amount of cheesiness present, which prevents this from ever getting really scary, but I did find myself having fun with it. And when the story gets towards the climax, it's crazy fun and filled with some furious violence. While the story isn't wholly unique and not terribly memorable, there is enough that's different to keep us entertained. There's no sex or nudity, but a lot of profanity and a massive helping of bloody violence. I give Malignant 3.5 out of 5 couches. Is this a horror you've been looking forward to seeing? I'd love to know how much you did or didn't like it if you've seen it. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.